Gotcha! You thought I was just gonna place on Hamilton and leave the classroom. Nope! Honestly, I'd kinda love to, though. However, this wonderful musical is relatively close to the start of our lesson. It all takes place in 1791. Now, without further ado, let's get started. The government that Washington would lead was completely new. No other country had a working republic to serve as an example for Washington and the other leaders. They had to find out on their own how to make the new government work. Washington began to build an administration that could help him meet the problems to come. His first challenge was to set up a cabinet, a group of advisors, to help him with his responsibilities. Although the Constitution provides for executive departments to give advice, it says nothing about how to select the leaders of these departments or how to organize them. Washington benefited from the counsel of James Madison, his unofficial administrative assistant. Washington established 4 departments and placed men he trusted at their heads. 2 men in this particular cabinet played vital roles in shaping America as we know it today. Our first founding father, who you may or may not know, depending on whether or not you've been my classmate for the past 3 months, went by the name Alexander Hamilton. Alexander was what was called a Federalist. Federalists believed in a limited but strong government. He wanted America to be a big industrial country with a huge, diverse economy. On the very same staff was a man named Thomas Jefferson. Y'all can unstand from this point forward. Tommy Boy here was Federalistant. He wanted the states to have more power than the federal government. These 2 men together had to make decisions that would change the entire country and their future. One of the most urgent effects on our newborn country was the economy. Members of the cabinet were receiving less than minimum wage, and the government was struggling to pay this alongside their warrants. This is where our boy Alexander Hamilton steps in. He picked up his quill and designed our financial system to help pay off the nation's debts and obligations. The first step to help the government rise up was to impose and collect excise taxes on whiskey and imported goods to obtain revenue. Many people were very upset about this because whiskey was not just something to get you drunk on Saturday night. Whiskey was used as a cleaner, whiskey was used as a disinfectant, it was used as medicine, it was used as, you name it. It had all sorts of uses and every household needed it, to the point where it was used as a form of money because we didn't have dollar bills, and if we did, there was no gold to back it, so they were worthless. The government had to repay Americans who had purchased bonds to finance the war. The Continental Congress had not been able to pay this debt, and most of the bond owners doubted that they would ever be repaid. However, news of possible repayment by the new government leaked to speculators, who began to purchase all the bonds they could. Because some of the bond owners thought that the bonds were worthless, they sold their bonds to the speculators for a fraction of their value. When the funding bill of 1790 passed, it arranged for the government to pay the bonds' printed value plus interest. Those who had sold their bonds for small sums were very angry. Nonetheless, the act helped the government stand by its promises. Third, Hamilton wanted the government to take over the responsibility of paying the state's debts. He hoped that the payment would increase the loyalty to the national government. The idea resulted in the Assumption Act of 1790. Fourth, Hamilton wanted to establish a national bank. The bank could hold tax revenue in one place, and the nation's financial dealings could be handled through the bank. The major share of the bank would be owned by private citizens. The federal government would only retain a 20% interest. Thus, the bank would be a largely private business. Congress set up the Bank of the United States in 1791. Several of Hamilton's ideas brought widespread disagreement. In particular, there was opposition to the assumption of state debts and federal involvement in banking. A group that was opposed to both ideas emerged under Jefferson's leadership. Jefferson, and many other Southerners, opposed assumption because the Southern states had already paid off most of their debts. These states did not want to help pay the debts of the northern states, and Jefferson imposed the national bank because it helped northern industries, but not southern agriculture. Hamilton's plan was put in place, but only after a compromise. In return for Jefferson's and the South's support of debt assumption, the federal capital would move to the South. Maryland and Virginia gave land along the Potomac River for a federal district that would be named after Columbus and George Washington. The new capital of Columbia was built on the land from Maryland. Despite the criticisms, Hamilton's plan worked, and the nation's credit and name improved. Washington hoped that there would be no political parties, but the groups that formed around Hamilton and Jefferson eventually became the basis of America's two-party political system. Hamilton's party was called the Federalist Party. Jefferson's party was called the Democratic Republican Party. Its members were called, for short, Republicans.
I hope you're happy.
Sir, is this about the Whiskey Rebellion in western Pennsylvania?
You could have given me a word of warning.
Because it is your Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, who has been agitating these men.
Thomas Jefferson resigned this morning.
I'm sorry, what?
This is expensive stuff.
The whiskey tax is very unpopular but necessary.
Haven't you talked enough?
I hate to think about what Jefferson will do when he's no longer in this cabinet.
Why?
Imagine the damage he'll inflict agitating from the outside.
In western Pennsylvania during the summer of 1794, angry farmers attacked a federal marshal who tried to arrest a whiskey distiller for not paying the tax. The mob also burned the home of a tax inspector and tarred and feathered other officials. President Washington wanted Pennsylvania to handle the problem, but the state's governor refused. Washington offered the rebels a group party to abide by the law, but guess what? They refused his offer. The president then called about 13,000 military men out as federal force. He commanded the rebels to disperse by September 1st, otherwise the militia would move in. Washington moved forcefully. He told the troops to combat and subdue all who were found in the arms in opposition to the national will and authority. To increase the image of strong federal power and to show his willingness to deal decisively with the rebellion, Washington himself led the front units of the troops for some miles. When the rest of the troops arrived at the scene, they arrested a few of the rebels. The troops condemned 2 rebels to death, but Washington later pardoned them. Washington's response to this whiskey rebellion proved his commitment to the rule of law. The rebellion's leaders realized that they could not allow their newfound freedoms to turn into lawlessness. Many nations, such as France, experienced a period of lawlessness after 2 revolutions meant to secure liberty. America's future was still uncertain, but by God's grace, the nation did not descend into violence. Washington's presidency had been a time of great trials for the new government, but the young nation survived. The time soon came for a new administration to take over and continue what Washington had begun. On September 19, 1796, 6 months before he had left office, Washington had his farewell address printed in the newspapers. Although some people thought that he should run again, he said that 2 4-year terms were enough. This decision showed that Washington did not grasp for power, unlike revolutionary leaders in other nations.
I know you're busy. What do you need, sir? Sir?
I want to give you a word of warning.
Sir, I don't know what you heard, but whatever it is, Jefferson started it.
Thomas Jefferson resigned this morning.
You're kidding.
I need a favor.
Whatever you say, sir, Jefferson will pay for his behavior.
Talk less.
I'll use the press, I'll write under a pseudonym. You'll see what I can do to him.
I need you to draft an address.
Yes, he resigned. You can finally speak your mind.
No, he's stepping down so he can run for president.
Good luck defeating you, sir.
I'm stepping down, I'm not running for president.
I'm sorry, what?
One last time. Relax, have a drink with me. One last time. Let's take a break tonight and then we'll teach him how to say goodbye. To say goodbye, you and I. talk about neutrality.
Sir, with Britain and France on the verge of war, is this the best
I
time?
want to warn against partisan fighting. Pick up a pen, start writing. I want to talk about what I have learned, the hard-won wisdom I have earned.
As far as the people are concerned, you have to serve. You could continue to serve.
No, one last time. The people will hear from me one last time. And if we get this right, we're gonna teach them how to say goodbye. You and I.
Mr. President, they will say you're weak.
No, they will see we're strong.
Your position is so unique.
So I'll use it to move them along.
Why do you have to say goodbye?
If I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. It outlives me when I'm gone. Like the scripture says, everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. They'll be safe in the nation we've made. I want to sit under my own vine and fig tree, a moment alone in the shade, at home in this nation we've made. One last time,
One last time. Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with an upright zeal, the faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as I myself must soon be to the mansions of rest.
I anticipate with pleasing expectation that retreat in which I promised myself to realize the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellow citizens, the benign influence of good laws under a free government, the ever-favorite object of my heart, and the happy rewards, I trust, of our mutual cares, labors, and dangers. One last time.
George Washington's going home.
Teach them how to say goodbye.
George Washington's going
You
home.
and I. Say goodbye, say goodbye, say goodbye one last time.